Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. And on this week's episode, Aaron and Kevin are talking about the reliability of the Bible. I wonder what you think. How did we get the Bible? Do you think it just kind of fell out of heaven, or a bright light shined on somebody's pen and just forced their hand to begin writing words? What do you think? What do you know? Well, in this conversation, we're going to talk about a little bit about how we got the Bible, its authenticity, its historical reliability, but also at the end of the day, what the main point of it is, and that's Jesus. And so, as always, our goal in this conversation is that you would take something that you hear and start another conversation with somebody else. So, as always, we hope you enjoy it. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, greetings.
Greetings.
Aaron. I almost called you Dr. Aaron. You ever think about getting your doctorate?
I thought about it.
Or practicing medicine?
I do practice medicine.
Yeah?
Well, all the time. I'm a dad.
Yeah. We're practicing medicine at home today. Little Willie guy. Got the sniffles.
Aw, nobody likes a Mr. Sniffles.
I know. I felt so bad for the
sniffles.
guy. Do you?
Yeah, maybe I got it from your son.
It's possible.
I'm okay.
Better verify that.
No, I thought about getting my doctorate, and then I realized you have to go to school for that.
I know. That's kind of how I felt about becoming a pastor. I was like, told myself when I graduated undergrad, like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I guess I'm not. Darn it.
It is crazy, though. I don't know if it's true. Somebody told me, though, that like the amount of credits that we take to become a pastor in our denomination,
Yeah.
like in any other regard, we should like have
done.
enough to have like a PhD.
Yeah, right. Yep. But just have a master's.
Yep.
But it's a divine master's. So.
Bam.
Like, yeah.
And that's, I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah.
That's good stuff, Kevin. The people are loving our conversation.
They're interested
so far.
in that. So this is a very, very hard and sharp transition, but I'm going to do it.
Do it.
Which is, so the topic for this last Sunday was talking about whether the Bible is reliable.
Right.
Which I think, I don't know this. I don't have a statistic, which is bad. I should have something at the ready. But I think this is a problem that comes very often from like academic, standpoints, from people who are coming because of, reasoned out, thought out reasons to say, well, yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if that's true.
Some is just there's a cultural narrative.
Yes.
That the Bible's not true. I've heard it so many times. Mm-hmm. I just heard it on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah.
I was listening to an episode there where he was talking to this Christian guy about intelligent design. But Joe Rogan said something about the authenticity of the Bible and how do you know? I mean, when it started from Hebrew to Greek and then went to Latin and then to English and then, and they didn't really talk more about it, but I was like, if he's thinking that that's the way that the Bible has been translated, that's just historically inaccurate.
Exactly.
For one.
And I've heard that same line from a comedian, same thing about it being translated, retranslated.
Well, it was last week, I think I was talking to a college student that I've been discipling, and he's got a bunch of non-Christian friends. Like his whole network is all non-Christian, and they were talking to him, saying the same thing. So we actually had a whole conversation. I was explaining to him, how we did get the Bible, and in particular, just the fact that so many people think. Well, there's lots of things that people think, but in this regard, people have the idea that the English Bible is like a game of telephone, like where you, if I were to whisper something in your ear and you whisper to somebody else down the line and we go around a whole circle, by the time we get to the end, you don't really have the same thing. Sometimes it's really messed up. Sometimes it's just a little bit off. And so some people think that our English Bible is, at some point it was just an oral tradition, and then it got written in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic and then translated to Latin, and then from Latin translated to whatever, German and Old English, and then to
finally now to where we are sitting today.
Yeah, and then if you want a new English version, you just take a different English version and then modernize it and stuff. And
a date it.
That's just not true. That's just not. I mean,
Yeah, you should tell
for
us.
any of the. I mean, any Bible translation worth its salt, and all of the popular ones are so the English Standard Version or the New International Version. They always go back to the original languages, to the Hebrew and the Greek, and they're translated by committee, usually like cross-denominational committee. So it's not just like, a couple of it's not just like there's a Lutheran Bible and there's a Baptist Bible or whatever. No, it's like faithful people who look at the original languages, come together and make these translations. Now, when you make translation, you do have to make choices.
Right.
Because just the way that grammar is structured, in Hebrew and in Greek, for there's like one word, and then to get all that meaning from that one word into English, you need like 5 or 6 words, to flesh it out. And so, are you gonna choose to like translate very, very, we would say like woodenly, or like very
one for one,
like literally,
right?
Because if you do that, like if you have the most accurate translation, it becomes not readable.
It's gonna be real tough to read
in English, So you gotta smooth some of that stuff out.
It would be the same as like, as an example, if you were to go to another country today and try and say in that other country, some sort of colloquialism from America, some saying that we use in America. Like, I forget which band it was, but it might have been, who's that Lutheran? Those 2 Lutheran guys, they sing campfire-y songs.
Oh, Lost and Found?
Lost and Found.
Yeah.
I think they shared this when they were in Canada, that they don't use the phrase like, oh, this rocks, or that rocks.
Oh.
Right? If I say something like, man, this cup of coffee rocks.
Yeah.
Someone, generally in America is going to be like, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
You're saying that's a good cup of coffee.
Yeah.
But apparently they didn't use that up in Canada. And so it just like didn't make any sense at all to anyone when they would say things like that.
Oh.
Or like rock on. Yeah. Like rock on doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of like that, right? When you come to translation, you can't just if you translate it one for one, it's not going to make sense to our ears. So yeah, you got to have a smoother translation. You're choosing what words really get at the heart of this or that term.
Yeah. And in your sermon, you briefly touched on some of the historicity, the historical accuracy of the Bible, based in the manuscripts that we have. And I don't, in the sermon, you didn't really go into even like what a manuscript is or any of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, we can do that here, but
Yeah.
Basically what happened in the earliest days of the church, especially with the Christian church, the Hebrew Old Testament has a little bit of a different story on its own. But let's just talk New Testament stuff.
Yeah.
As the apostles are going about and doing their ministry, particularly like the Apostle Paul and is writing letters, and so a lot of the letters are some of the first stuff that are happening, and then people would receive those letters and then receive it as like as important doctrinal stuff. So then there were people who would copy those things because they didn't have copy machines, right? You couldn't snap a picture and text everybody.
Forward the email.
Yeah, and so people would hand write these things, and then they would copy it, and they took this job so seriously, and then they would get passed on. Then eventually the Gospels were written down as well to tell the story of Jesus. Same thing. They were written and then copied and copied and copied, and that's, I think, where sometimes people are like, oh, so it's a game of telephone,
Right.
But as you said, where we have like, you use 24,000. That number it keeps going up. They keep finding more and more manuscripts. The manuscripts they're finding, most of them, there are some that are, there's a handful that are very complete, but most of the manuscripts are fragments.
Right.
Because they're old. They're old pieces of papyrus or animal skin or lots of different materials that were written on. So they're finding these things. But then, so let's take, the book of Romans or whatever. So we find a copy of Romans somewhere, and then somewhere else at some dig site, they're reading the words and they're like, that looks like Romans, this section of crumpled up broken paper.
Yeah.
And you stack it on top of another fragment of a manuscript that you found in a different location, and of all those lines of the text, there's, I mean, what are the accuracy? I mean,
It's like a 99.9%. I don't have the like.
I have it in a book that I read, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But
It's
it's incredibly,
yeah.
for the amount of time that has that where all these manuscripts are being written.
That's right.
It's over a lot of time.
Yeah, like the earliest manuscript we have is from 125 AD.
Yeah.
And then you get manuscripts that are all the way, 10th century, or even, I mean, I guess that's like
Yeah.
I'm not sure beyond that, but obviously by the time you hit the printing press, then we're not dealing with it.
Right. And then you're also in a variety of countries and all this stuff.
Yep.
The only difference is, and they're called variants.
That's right. Textual variants.
The vast majority of the variants do not change the essential meaning of the letters or the gospels. There are some variants that are a little bit more significant than others. The vast majority of them are grammatical things. The best scribes just copied what they saw. Sometimes scribes would put a little bit of a little bit of a grammatical smoothing out in there.
That's right. Yep.
But most Bibles, if there's a significant variant on a trustworthy manuscript,
right,
there should be a footnote in your Bible indicating like, hey,
the earliest manuscripts say this or didn't include this verse. Yeah. So
that's what that means.
That's right. Yeah, you'll notice that like every now and then it'll jump, and it's usually really easy to miss. I mean, most time you don't even notice it, but you'll be going along and it'll go from like verse 32 to verse 34, and you'll say, wait a minute, where's verse 33? Yeah. And then you look at the footnote and it'll say, oh, some of the earliest manuscripts, exclude verse 33 or what have you.
Right. And so that's an English version translation decision on kind of saying, well, there are certain manuscripts that are more reliable than other ones, because they're either a full manuscript or they've been around for a long time. And so,
and when Aaron was talking about some of those scribes, like smoothing over difficulties, so there's somewhat of a science to compiling these and determining what is more likely or less likely. You can't come down, 100% hard and fast, but so there are some times where it's like the scribe wanted to make sure the reader understood like this Jesus was the Christ. Yeah. So instead of saying like, I mean, it's some things as small as saying like a Messiah to the Messiah, something like that. But if they have another manuscript that doesn't say the, it's less definitive, they'll say that was probably it. And a scribe came along who wanted to sort of like, and you hate to fault the scribe because he's honestly probably just like a pious dude who's like, I really want people to know like what I know, but it's that, I mean, it's really that minor in almost all of the textual variant cases. Yeah. Like you said, there's only a couple that, and again, they don't change any major doctrinal theology, but are just larger than, an article or something like that.
Right. And so I think, knowing some of this stuff is really interesting. I read a book that's called "How We Got the Bible." The last name of the author is Lightfoot. I forget the first name, but it was a pretty easy read, and it goes through all this stuff. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't know how we got the Bible, and we think somehow it's like, maybe it just like fell out of heaven, I mean, I remember thinking as a kid, you hear that the Bible is God's word, or it was written by God, or
inspired by God, inerrant, all these things.
And so I think I had an image in my mind of some, I don't know, like, that it just kind of showed up, and I think as it developed, I think I saw it later on, maybe being like a guy in a room.
Yeah, that's what I used to think.
With there's just like light shining on him, and he's holding a pen, and he can't control it because God is controlling his hand.
His eyes are like bulging out of his head, and it's like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not probably it either.
No.
Especially when you think about Paul. I mean, these letters of Paul to those churches that are included in our New Testament because they were so foundational for the teachings of Jesus. I mean, this is kind of the interesting thing, right? When we're talking about oral history and written history, Jesus didn't write anything down.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe he did. Maybe he wrote some notes. I don't know. Did he have note cards when he preached? But Jesus isn't the author of any of the books of the Bible, right? Which is kind of interesting. Like, he didn't write things down. Whereas in, I think, every other major religion, those figures, that's who you look into the person who wrote down sort of your sacred text, right?
Yeah.
Received, say, revelation from God, purportedly. But in this case, Jesus just taught his disciples. He went around with them. He did life with them. And so he did teach, but it was his disciples who really recorded the teachings of Jesus. And as you said, the first was really Paul's letters, and he probably wasn't the only person writing to churches. I cannot.
John
I guess
did,
you got John and Peter,
yeah.
and I would think others that just didn't survive, or maybe were less, held up with less esteem or something like this. But these guys, Paul, Peter, John, they had spent time with Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, they spent their lives with Jesus, so they were taking the teachings they had heard from Jesus, and Jesus had told them, you can read this in the end of Luke, I'm giving you guys the authority. Go out, preach, for repentance. Well, what are we preaching on? Well, everything I've done with you, all the things I've showed you, I've taught you. So it's like you get a little bit of that sort of oral transmission from Jesus to them, but that's why these guys are revered. That's why these writings are books of the Bible, because it's like, okay, who's the authority? Well, the people who were with Jesus, his closest followers.
Right.
We're going to trust them. I mean, even in Acts, right, when they need to replace Judas, they say, well, it can't just be anybody. It's got to be someone who's been with us the whole time, who's been a witness of all these works of Jesus. So the authority, it's not like you say, it's not like there was some sort of beaming down from above, and then that's how they decided, okay, this is it, because, it's like this, that's almost like, I don't know, that sword in the stone or something like that. Like, it's not, it's more like earthy and almost normal than that, which is what's interesting.
Which God works through.
Exactly.
And God inspires.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like, it's cool to even see the Bible as this way in which God is relating to us in such an intimate way.
Yeah.
Like, he's not far off beaming down a text from above. No, he's actually using people who he spent time with.
Right. Well, the Old Testament too, written in Hebrew, was compiled, for 1,500 years before even the latest writings of the New Testament. So, I mean, the whole Bible is probably compiled over about a 1,600 year span. And so the Old Testament was compiled basically just as the nation of Israel went along. Like, it was just a natural, like, these books are important, these books are read, these books. So there was just kind of this common collecting of the sacred texts. And so it was just a very natural, like, compiling of information and texts. And, and they would pass these things around, and the scribes would make copies of them as well. And so, but I just want to, there's so much that can be said here. And I mean, I need to admit a little bit of ineptitude here. I mean, by no means am I an expert in all of that history, because there's a lot. I know some of the basics, but so, I mean, one of the interesting things too is like that the Bible was compiled over 1,600 years by, was it like 40 different authors, 40 authors, I think 40 authors on in 4 countries in 3 different languages.
Wow. Yeah.
And it all tells one story that centralizes with Jesus the Christ. And so there's just some of that stuff that, like, historically speaking, no other book of ancient ancient writing comes even close.
It's nothing like it.
some of these other books of like history that you talked about,
Yeah.
were just written by one man.
Mm-hmm. And they were important. I mean, seen as important enough to, hey, we better copy this down.
Right.
I'm sure more than the amount that we have surviving. I mean, because like Aristotle, right? You know his name. I say the name Aristotle, and you know who that is. And it's like, oh, yeah. Well, because he was a pretty important figure in history. And he taught us a lot of things. He had a lot of wisdom.
Right.
But, yeah, we got 12 surviving copies.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and that's just one guy writing. So the inspiration coming across from 1600 years, 4 countries, 3 languages, 40 different hands writing. It's like I mean, and then you can keep going down with I mean, you mentioned in your sermon like the number of prophecies that end up being fulfilled. It's like it would be almost impossible for the way it was compiled over that amount of time and the way it was done. It would be impossible for somebody to manipulate it in such a way to make a story that they wanted to make. It's just not. And that's not possible.
I want to emphasize that point in a big way too. Thinking about the New Testament, because we alluded to the letters coming first and then the Gospels, but just to give you a sense of the timing of that, this isn't a long period of time. We're talking 1-2 generations after Jesus has died.
Yeah.
Right. And so here's another thought as far as someone weaving a tale.
Yeah.
You can't weave a tale about a historical event when you have living witnesses to that historical event.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, but is it going to be believed and accepted by the majority of people? Or not the majority of people, but by a whole community, a growing community? It would not make sense. For instance, I mean, just to give you like for instance, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's a big chapter on the resurrection. One of the things he says is, go talk to these eyewitnesses of the person Jesus. Okay, now maybe you can include that in like a legendary work of history if no one was ever able to read it at the time.
Yeah.
But Paul's writing this at the time when people could actually go verify this.
Right.
They could go talk to these people. And so, yeah, so it's the other thing I just was listening to, it was on the historicity of the Bible or the believability of the Bible. It had to do with genre. This is a C.S. Lewis thing, actually. C.S. Lewis talked about how in the ancient world, there's no such thing as historical fiction. It's not a genre that exists.
Huh.
There is such a thing as legend, but that genre of literature, the Bible is actually really bad at, because it includes all sorts of details that do nothing to improve the plot, so to speak. Legends were filled with, I mean, every detail was extremely significant and built up this person who is the legend or the story, of heroism. But the Bible will talk about like Jesus sleeping on a cushion, in the boat. That detail is unnecessary.
Yeah.
You get all these unnecessary details sometimes about like timing or little objects that surround it. It doesn't fit into the genre of legend, but there's no such thing as historical fiction. So what are you left with? People writing down what they actually saw and witnessed, and they included a detail that doesn't matter now. No, like the 153 fish, right? They catch 153 fish when Jesus shows up on the beach after his resurrection, and there are actually people in history, like Christians. I mean, even like major theologians who wanted to like connect that number to something significant. It's very possible that's just the number, and it's not a code. It didn't mean anything. It's just that's how many fish they caught, and they counted them because it's like this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, just to emphasize that what you're saying about these aren't cleverly devised stories, so to speak.
Yeah. And then just so you've got this the basic idea that it took a lot of time, lots of different authors to compile this one concise story. There's that piece. There's the manuscript piece that we've just got just the amount of data, but then also there's more and more archaeological finds.
That's right.
That are being uncovered that point to Jesus and events of the Bible being real. The name of Jesus is found in extra biblical sources. Even inscribed in places, locating even characters from the Bible, like Pontius Pilate being a governor at the time that Jesus was killed. Like those inscriptions have been found. So it's just like
there's a lot of evidence. Is what we're saying.
Yeah. So
yeah,
it's a sad reality, but it happens all the time that there are people do this just with history in general, where they just say, well, it didn't happen. And you just repeat yourself enough times and just say it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen, it didn't happen, and you try to just rewrite history.
Right.
And you just say, well, if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. And people do that with the Bible. They're just like, nope, game of telephone. Nope. It's this old, what do they say? Misogynistic book,
sure.
endorses slavery and warfare and all that old fashioned stuff. And and that's the narrative, and that gets spun, and that's what people hear, and nobody actually. I think most of those people who say that probably have never actually even read it.
Yeah, right.
Or looked into it, And that's the thing where you're like, if you're going to be a genuine person with an opinion, like
hopefully it's built on something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not just.
And the Bible can stand. Like this is the cool thing. Like, yeah, we take a ton of stuff in the Bible on faith for sure, but the Bible itself as a historical work,
right.
It stands the test.
Yeah, you are left with Jesus, undoubtedly. We think the New Testament, like you are left with, here is an event that happened in history, and we cannot deny that.
Right.
And so in some ways the Bible is sort of challenging every one of us to say, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to respond?
Yes.
Like you have to have some response, and you can choose not to do anything about it, but understand you're still choosing that's your response.
Yeah.
You can choose not to make a decision, but understand that you're choosing that,
Yeah.
And it's sort of that question of like, and this is, I hope like as a community of faith, what we can do is like these things, they are, I think, fascinating to learn. I think they're encouraging, to me in my Christianity, but they are not, don't take these things as ammunition to go, blow up somebody, right? In an argument, and just totally smash them. Because if you do that, then you're, even if you've read the Bible, you're not listening to it, right? Yeah. These things, and that's getting to the faith question, right? Like our faith isn't my faith in Jesus is not founded in the historicity of the Bible.
Right.
My faith in Jesus is founded upon what the Bible attests to about what Jesus has done for me and for you.
Yeah.
And of course he did that, through selfless love and through concern for others. But, on that same point, I imagine there are, and I've talked to many of you who have people in your life who do hold the Bible at arm's length.
Oh yeah.
And they're very skeptical of it. These things can help you in conversation, like this, basically say like, hey, I learned this about the Bible. I didn't know this actually about the Bible, but I learned this. What do you think about that? What do you make of that?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you and I have had this conversation yet. I'll tell you a little bit more off air, but there was a member of our church who came in to church, and before the service came up to me saying that he was up all night until like 4 a.m. Debating some non-Christian friends about whether the Bible is true. And I was like, hey, that's going to be like the sermon.
You're on point, buddy.
Oh, great. So we talked after, because he was telling me he was just getting kind of frustrated because they wouldn't budge, and I don't know if he was approaching it the best way, but we talked about, like you said in your sermon, at the end of the day, bring it back to Jesus.
Yeah.
Let's bring it back to Jesus, and let's just ask people like, what do you make of Jesus? Because I hope that he re-engages with those people and can have that conversation. Because that'd be interesting, because when it comes to these kinds of arguments, and you even you did a little bit in your sermon about like science and scientism and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. You can go down all kinds of wormholes with people and debate stuff, but but at the end of the day, like it's got to come to the conversation about Jesus. So, cause like if I don't know, if we're talking about if we're talking about the Bible or something and you're an unbeliever and I'm a believer, and we try to talk about, whether or not this Bible is true or not, we're entering that conversation with totally different like expectations. And if you think about it like a game, it's probably like you're kind of entering it like, hey, I'm going to play baseball, and I'm entering it thinking that we're going to play football. And I try to have this whole conversation about from this lens, and you're doing that, and we're just not even, we're not really even talking,
It can be really easy to talk past somebody with a different set of beliefs. Yeah. Yep.
So what can we engage in? And a conversation about Jesus can certainly do that, because at the end of the day, his death and resurrection is that's the linchpin, So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It is
fascinating stuff. So
yeah. That's. I agree.
So
I agree.
Is the Bible reliable? That was kind of the question.
That's right.
And I mean, we definitely would say, yeah,
more than I want it to be. When I think about its claims on me, and that's part of the kicker too. And I think, just as maybe one final thought, that's a helpful piece as well, to also level with whomever you're talking with about your own struggling, because the reality is, if I believed everything the Bible said perfectly, I wouldn't be doing things, in opposition to God. But I doubt God, and we all have doubts in our faith, and we all have there's things in there that are going to challenge us, because they're going to be pointed right at us and about things that we struggle with. And so I think that can be helpful too, just as you talk to people. It's kind of like, it's not like I'm the great Christian because the Bible. Part of accepting the Bible's reliability is that it makes me, no better than you, even if you're not a Christian. It doesn't make me better than you. It says like we're all in need of Jesus.
Yeah.
So just get back to his death and resurrection, because that's what he's done for you. There's good news.
Yeah. And that was your final thought, and my final thought is I know this reality because I've felt it, and I in talking to a lot of people over my years of ministry, I know a lot of you are sometimes intimidated to talk to other people about the Bible because you don't feel like you know enough about the Bible, and you're afraid like somebody's going to know something about the Bible that you don't know, or ask you a question you
can't answer,
have the answer to. Well, it's okay to be humble about that, and if they bring something up, I mean, it happens to me when I'm teaching Bible class, or like some you
guys ask good questions.
Yeah, you know things about the Bible that I haven't seen or heard, and it's like, I'll have to look into that, and
right.
Like I went to school for this stuff, so it's okay to like plead humility and be like,
yes,
because that's another opportunity to re-engage in conversation. Be like, you know what, I don't know about that. I'll look into that, and let's meet back up and chat again. So that's one, and two is engage with it more. The more you engage with God's word with an open mind, and just ask God, like, hey, just keep revealing yourself to me little by little. You don't need an elephant all at once or whatever.
That's right, one bite at a time.
Yeah.
Lord, to whom shall we go?
Yeah.
So you got the words of eternal life, man. This is great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right, brother.
Cheers, brother.
Good stuff. Talk to you later.